97.3 FM, City FM. It's live on City FM's Facebook page and on MEST Africa's Facebook page as well. So what is EdTech Monday? EdTech Monday is a platform for EdTech entrepreneurs, education stakeholders, and government reps to facilitate critical conversations on the use of tech for teaching and learning. Now, the show is an initiative of the MasterCard Foundation's Regional Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in ICT, and is part of the foundation's strategy to find solutions to Africa's youth employment by closing the gap in access to quality education and advancing the integration of tech in education policies and practices across Africa. Now, EdTech Monday builds on the foundation's Young Africa Work strategy in Ghana, with a vision of harnessing opportunities to shape the future of work and to create an inclusive economy with enhanced resilience for young people and the most vulnerable, especially women, by 2030. Now, to realize this vision, MasterCard Foundation has partnered with MEST Africa to bring you EdTech Monday, which airs on the last Monday of every month, like today. So today, what are we discussing? Today, we are discussing accelerating blended learning in Africa. Now, the last decade has seen tremendous progress in the adoption and implementation of ICT in sub-Saharan Africa that has triggered disrupted teaching and learning approaches. Now, research has shown that blended learning, also called hybrid learning, when sufficiently facilitated, transforms teachers' pedagogical approaches and leads to better learning outcomes. So today we're asking, how best can we implement and accelerate the uptake of blended learning in Ghana? My name is Nathan Quao. I'll be hosting the session, and I have four wonderful people here with me. I've got Kabiru Seidu, who's Chief Executive Officer of Nubian VR. Now, Kabiru Seidu is an innovative product designer and CEO of Nubian VR, a leading interactive development company with operations in Ghana. He's an expert in building virtual reality, simulations, games, and interactive products for learning, training, and entertainment about driving digital education for young people. Kabiru is also the General Secretary for the Gamers Association Ghana, where he drives youth involvement in the digital space. Kabiru, good morning. Welcome to EdTech Monday.
Morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Thank you so much. My next panelist is Nicholas GBORSE. He's an educator at Bishop Herman Senior High School, and he's the 2018 Best National Teacher. And he has 1.5 decades worth of practice in the pre-tertiary education space. He's a policy advocate and influencer, and he's serving on 2 boards in the pre-tertiary space where he drives school policy formulation, modeling, and implementation. He has a passion for school culture, teacher mentorship, critical friendship, school and teaching innovation, best practice sharing, and teacher accountabilities. Nicholas, good morning. Welcome to EdTech Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. Our next panelist is Engineer Dr. Mrs. Millicent Agangiba, Executive Director, Inclusive Tech Group. Now, Dr. Agangiba is a passionate disability tech advocate and Executive Director of Inclusive Tech Group, a non-profit organization advancing digital accessibility for the vulnerable, especially persons with disabilities. He's a member of several professional bodies, including the International Association of Engineers, the Association of Information Systems, and the Association of Computing Machinery, and a reviewer of several international journals and conferences. And she's published over 20 publications in peer-reviewed journals, and has also received several awards from international organizations. Dr. Agangiba, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome.
Thank you. Let me also say that I'm a senior lecturer at UPSA.
I see. Okay, very important. We need to add that. Senior lecturer at UPSA. We need to add that. Great. And our final panelist is Evelyn Quaynor, level 300 law student at GIMPA. That's Richard Sky's alma mater. Now, she's a level 300 law student at GIMPA. She aspires to be a human rights and criminal lawyer in the near future. And one remarkable aspect of Evelyn's academic journey lies in the experience of blended learning methodologies such as online lectures, group discussions, and using interactive learning resources. Now, in addition to her passion for law, she holds a keen interest in public relations and governance. Evelyn, good morning. And many thanks for joining us on EdTech Monday.
Thank you for having me, Nathan.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It's always nice whenever we have these conversations. Let me start with Nicholas. Nicholas, you are the teacher here, of course. Doc is also a teacher. But Nicholas, let me start off with you. Now, we know that teachers are masters of pedagogy. Now, how would you describe the current reality of blended learning in Ghana? And how have you incorporated this approach to learning and teaching? And what successes and challenges have you experienced in your own practice?
Thank you, Nathan, and good morning, listeners. A lot is going on in the space as far as blended learning is concerned in Ghana. I will start off by saying that the tertiary education sector in particular has seen and continue to see a lot of blended learning approaches in the delivery of education. We have the pre-COVID era, the COVID era, and now we have the post-COVID era, if I may allow to put it that way. Ahead of the COVID era, or what we call the pre-COVID era, there was not so much done about blended learning in the country, even though in isolation, some universities and institutions try to do their best. At the moment, almost all of the tertiary institutions in Ghana have invested heavily into blended learning. Mention can be made of the KNUSTs and the Legons, UCCs, and then Ghana Communication Technology University, and of recent, the colleges of education, by virtue of the realities they are faced with regard to increase in enrollments, they are also compelled to do some blended learning. So much is going on in that space. But when we come to the pre-tertiary sector, that is where maybe not too much is being heard of, and then people can also argue that not so much is going on there. But even there too, quite a lot is happening. We can divide them into the elite private schools and then the typical public schools. For the elite private schools, a lot is going on there by way of blended learning. You have a lot of AI tools being deployed there. You have a lot of games and then simulations, all of which are being used by some of these institutions. Likewise, even when it comes to the public schools, for the pre-tertiary, for the KGs, or what we call preschool level, so much is going on in some of them also with regard to the use of games, etc. You go to some of our elite public schools also, something is happening. Some are beginning to use games, AI tools, and simulations, as I've mentioned earlier. The challenge has to be that in terms of coordination, and maybe on a large scale, we do not appear to be seeing that much of them. But something is going on. How about me, myself? Pre-COVID era, not so much was done by me and my colleagues, but COVID pushed us to become a bit innovative. So I remember initially when COVID set in, and then our students were asked to go home. We're all thinking of what to do to engage them. So we started off using WhatsApp platforms where we either send them slides to read on, and then sometimes we try to engage them live in live sessions. Later, we deployed the use of Google Forms, Google platforms, and then of late, Zoom platforms are also being used. It comes with challenges and then prospects as well. The problem of digital divide is always there. The fact that not everybody have access to some of these tools they have to use. For example, we are talking about handheld devices. It can be the laptops, it can be the mobile phones. Not everybody have access to them. That is a challenge. Then the fact that we are used to human contact in the delivery of education in Ghana makes blended learning something like a culture shock to initial users. But along the line, they become used to it, but it's a challenge we need to deal with. Then I also identify socio-cultural issues where certain segment of society believe that internet is only associated with bad things, so they will not encourage learners or their children to get involved. Sometimes you are faced with some of these challenges. But the prospects includes the fact that it brings some level of excitement to the learners. Then some new experiences are also brought to them. And you also talk about the fact that even you, the fact that it also creates an offline learning situation for the learners. For example, if you are talking about slides, it means that there's something they can always make reference to. Even if it's a voice note a teacher or lecturer uses, it means that the student can always go back and play that. And so what it does is that it helps to encourage relearning, learning. So there are a lot of prospects with regard to the use of that. And so basically, that is a situation of blended learning in the country. But let me also add that depending on the approach you look at, blended learning is going on everywhere. For example, we know teachers use various modes of delivery. They combine delivery media. But then of late, when we're talking about blended learning, we mostly are talking about convergence between face-to-face learning and then online learning, maybe where that is where our focus is. And maybe that is where we cannot say we have done so much. But if you look at the first two, I think that is being done by virtually every teacher.
Great,
Yeah,
great,
you.
Wonderful. Evelyn, let me bring you. We've heard from the teacher. Let's hear from you. You're on the other side, and you sit in the classroom. What's been your own experience with blended learning and the institutions you have attended or attending? How have they incorporated this approach, and what are the successes and challenges that you have experienced as a student?
Thank you. My experience has been so. Because prior to COVID, the school already had systems in place that encourage blended learning, like the projectors, use of projectors for presentation. And also the learning management system, that's the LMS. Some lecturers use it to assess students, and you could have it anywhere. You didn't necessarily have to be in school to take the test. And with the success, during the pandemic, most of our classes were online. So the academic calendar wasn't disrupted too much. Lectures were going on. It didn't go to a halt. And also for the students, you didn't necessarily have to transport yourself to school. So it's safe. Yeah. And with the challenges, we faced quite a number of them. And one of them is network problems. There has been times where students wanted to ask questions or bring a suggestion in class, and the network is glitching, so it wasn't possible. Like the students wasn't able to add up. And the unconducive learning environment. So with that one, maybe you can have it at the comfort of your home. So you're there and your parents just calls you to run an errand. Also, noise in the background and all that. Calls interrupting your class if you don't have access to a laptop. And virtual classroom management challenges. Some lecturers have this waiting room thing. It's like a normal class where you have to. So the waiting room, you having like probably had network challenges and you were logged out. You join, the lecturer is not really focusing on that part of the class. So you have to be there for some time and tell your friends to alert the lecturer that you're in the waiting room for him to admit you. And also, there have been times where a lecturer is asking a question. Can you hear me? There's no response. All that. So,
I see.
And also, I realized that when the live sessions are too much, students become too relaxed with the academic work, which can sometimes be bad. So,
I see. Interesting. So we've had a perspective of a teacher and a student. Let me speak to Kabiru and Dr. Agangiba. First, Dr. Agangiba, do we need to accelerate the learning approach in Ghana, and what challenges have you experienced while pushing for the uptake of technology in Ghana's education system? The same question goes to you, Kabiru. So, Doc, you first.
Yeah, so there's a lot that we need to do if I have to start that way in terms of accelerating blended learning in Ghana. And we can start with looking at our digital infrastructure. I think earlier on, our seasoned teacher mentioned that, Nicholas, talking about not everybody has access to the devices. Just last week, I had shared a video and I expected the student to have watched, and then we have some discussion. I went and somebody told me, I've not watched it. And I asked why. It's like, oh, I don't have a laptop. And I'm like, okay, how about the phone? And she just showed me. I'm using a YAM phone. How am I supposed to? And this is Accra, right? And the center in the heart of Ghana. So you can imagine when you go beyond what is happening. And that's the reality. She doesn't have it. How is she supposed to listen to it? So access is one problem, the costs of having the devices that can help. And then also the infrastructure itself, like you talk about the connectivity, internet access, and so on and so forth. It's also a problem that we are faced with. Sometimes we don't have very good network, and that can make the student take advantage. When he or she is talking, it's perfect. As soon as you begin to ask questions, network problem is gone offline and you don't know what is happening. There is no longer interaction going on. And then also we can talk about the internet cost as well. So if you even have the device, having access to internet, we know how many times you have to bundle. I mean, we can all share our experiences, and before you know it, it's finished. So if you have to have live sessions every now and then with students, then it becomes a bit problematic because they will not be able to buy data regularly. I know at the beginning when COVID set in, they were having some subsidies, but they tell me it's gone. So it's difficult now. Yeah, I mean, COVID gave some free boosts and we are repaying now, right? So, right. So that's also another issue. And then we also even have to look at the teachers, the capacities that they have in terms of using some of this technology. It will surprise you. We are supposed to be using, but a lot of teachers have challenges. No training, nothing. They just come and dump one platform and say, start using it. How are you supposed to use it? And so we are not able to optimize what we are supposed to do. Okay. You know, we will try to do one or two things, and that is it. But a lot has been invested into the platform. So if they also invest money in training and building the capacity of the teachers, I'm sure that will help a lot to, you know, push the blended learning approach. And definitely also every stakeholder involved. We can talk about the parents. I think people have mentioned that the way some parents look at technology, they always want to resist technology because everything bad is technology, right? And so the child is in a basic school and you will not allow the child to have a computer. You will not allow the child to use a phone. You can't own a phone. And then his or her phone to the child cannot have access to it. And then the teacher will give you even P2 or stage 2. They'll say go online to YouTube and type this and watch. How is the child supposed to do that, right? So we need to bring them on board. We need to let them understand what is happening, especially the parent. Okay. And from the very lower stages, we need to give them more explanation as to how they can support their children, even if you don't have a computer. What are the other alternatives, the options, so that together I think that we can achieve what we're looking out for. Because all of these challenges make it very difficult, and I think later on we will talk about the other options you also need to.
Okay, Kabiru, let me bring you in.
Thank you.
Let me get your perspective on the same thing. You know, whether or not we need to accelerate blended learning, and what are some of the challenges that, you know, you have observed or seen as we push for the uptake, you know, of technology in Ghana's educational system?
Absolutely. Thank you, Nathan. As it relates to blended learning and being able to accelerate it, I think primarily we have no option. So blended learning, I think, brings on the table certain kinds of possibilities that otherwise do not exist using traditional means of teaching. So I think in 1970, an educational psychologist, Benjamin Bloom, conducted a study where essentially he found out that with individualized one-on-one tutorship, you can move a student who was at the bottom 80 of the class to almost the top 20 of the class, just by being able to provide them individualized instruction. But up until now, I mean, that has just been a theoretical approach because it's not really feasible for you to imagine each student having, you know, an individualized teacher or a tutor who is actually meeting all of their needs. So we've thought of this as, you know, yeah, great concept, but not practical. But with technology and the possibilities of blended learning, more and more, I mean, the reality of being able to actually draw people, improve the quality of education dramatically has started to present itself. And for me, this is precisely the reason why we must, essentially take a very proper look and make a proper assessment of blended learning and how we can, accommodate it into our educational system. In terms of the challenges, I think my co-panelists have already touched on a lot of them. Generally, I think I would just reemphasize two of them. One is infrastructure. Infrastructure in terms of just how equipped schools are, in terms of being able to, deliver education using, internet-mediated or even computer-mediated education. Most schools are very not equipped for this. At the same time, too, as well, as it relates to teacher training, lots of teachers have the best intentions to be wanting to help their students to learn. But then most of the time, in terms of like the kinds of support that they do have to be able to say, okay, build skills, digital skills that can enable them, facilitate digital learning with their kids, most of the time it's non-existent. So when we look at those two critical problems, I think if we're really interested in driving adoption of blended learning, certainly we need to be able to start looking at how we could strengthen, both our digital infrastructure, but then also strengthen, the skill sets our teachers have and the skill sets our teachers bring into the classroom.
Wonderful. Let me get to Millicent and Nicholas just in a few minutes. Can you just tell us how the various actors in the education ecosystem are involved when co-creating or developing solutions to advance learning, especially when, since we're talking about blended learning in Ghana?
Okay. So when it comes to the systems that are developed or put in place for online tuition or interaction, from where I stand, I really think that few people decide on that. Okay, so you'll be there and you are told, oh, we've put up this system. So from today, this is the default password. This is your username. Go onto it and start using it to help improve the learning. And you're wondering, that's it. Who says that we need these features and who says they are helpful? Many a times, teachers who are very key actors, the students, they are not involved in developing those kind of platforms. All we know is there is a platform, so it has to do with that management, and then some few people within the ICT directorate or unit that decide on the kind of system that they should put together for us to use. And so personally, I feel that the key people are always left out. They are not involved, and that is why when also not much is invested into the training and the capacity building, we see that there's just a huge challenge when it comes to doing a very good work with the blended learning, because you are not involved in the development and then you are not also getting the needed capacity building. So how are you supposed to be effective at what you do?
Okay.
So I think it's about time that if we want to build systems that can fit the context, if you want to build systems that are sustainable, if you want to build systems that can really help to accelerate, we have to involve the key actors and make sure that whatever we put up, apart from it being robust, is something that we can associate with and something that has the needed features that can fit our context. Because the issue of trying to transfer technology from somewhere and then dump it into a different context always creates what we call the design reality gap. It doesn't work. And so we need to involve the key actors so as to put up a very relevant system that we can use. And definitely, once we do that, it becomes more sustainable. That's what I think.
Right, Nicola.
Yeah, I think Doc has touched on quite a lot. In isolation, a lot is going on in the space by a lot of actors and players. By players in the industry, we are talking about teachers, designers, publishers, policy formulators, implementers, administrators, etc. All of these are actors in the space. Unfortunately, first challenge is there's lack of coordination among these actors. So what is happening at the moment is that each person or each organization is on their own, and they are doing their own things. And so the challenge has to do with the fact that there's no policy guideline regulating that space at the moment. So it appears everybody is left on their own to do whatever pleases them. And because of that, just as Doc has touched on, much of the product they come out with or they design are not context bound. They are not necessarily they are not fit for purpose for a lot of the institutions that they are designed for. For example, we're talking about curriculum change in the pre-tertiary sector now. A lot is going on there by way of ICT deployment. But then, until a designer is knowledgeable in the curriculum, he is not able to design a product that can best fit the realities of the learners at that level. You cannot just assume that you can sit in Accra and design a product that will meet the needs of the learners at that level until you bring on board several stakeholders, which some of them will be pedagogy experts, some of them will be curriculum experts, etc. And so this coordination is lacking, and it has to do with lack of policy in that space. And so what is also happening is the fact that there's also very little input from a lot of the practitioners, actually the ones who really matter in the space. There's very little input from them. So yes, we are doing a lot, but what is being done is not filling the very gap we seek to fill for that matter.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think you
want to add to that?
Yes, okay. I will just hammer on what my co-panelists have said. Coordination, I think, is very key. And when we talk about coordination, I think coordination on a national level is actually very important to us as well. So normally what you see is that, a lot of the educational technology solutions that are rolling around in schools are primarily initiated by individual entities, not-for-profits and stuff like that. And those are good initiatives, and those are helpful in terms of just being able to, facilitate the adoption of blended learning. But at the end of the day, I think there needs to be a very clear governmental strategy on just where we should be moving as it relates to just digital teaching and digital learning. What kinds of, we invest a lot in terms of just textbooks. We invest a lot of our educational budget goes into things that are much more, physical in nature. Textbooks, chairs, those kinds of stuff, very important. But then at the same time too as well, we need to start seeing educational budget going into, say, developing of entire digital curriculums. And because there's also a certain aggregate benefit of actually being able to have a coordinated strategy, in the sense, if the government decides that, okay, we are going to invest in the next 5 years, we're going to invest in essentially creating, the content for K1, from JSS, from primary school all the way to senior secondary school. Essentially, over time, we'll start seeing how we can, once they do it from year 1 to year 5, year 6, you're just updating the content. So it's a minimal cost. Yes, I agree. Upfront, it might be a little bit expensive, but then the compounding interest is really when you have the existing knowledge base, and all you just have to do is update it and ensure it reaches more people.
Great. Kabiru, let me just stay with you.
Yeah.
So I think we've laid the ground beautifully, but how can we accelerate blended learning and accelerate it very well?
Well, so, definitely, this also hits on my earlier point. I think it's very important to have government coordination on this. There has to be a national strategy. By having a national strategy, then I think it makes it easier for you to now start getting a clear sense of what the key infrastructure you need to put in place are. So, for example, we have Evelyn who is in school, and essentially, by default, a phone is part of the learning experience. It's like going to a class without a notebook. So we need to be able to start asking ourselves the question, how might we be able to accelerate the adoption of things like smartphones? If we know that it's becoming a device that is primarily for learning, then we must be able to start asking ourselves the hard question. Yes, we don't manufacture it, but there's some kinds of deals that we're able to essentially put in place with, say, the Huawei's, the Techno, or whatever, to be able to make sure that anybody who is going into at least a tertiary institution does have a fit enough mobile phone or smartphone to be able to, essentially conduct their learning activities. Secondly, too, as well, I think we also need to start having huge expectations of those who are in the spaces that can help us accelerate this. So the telcos, for example, I think my co-panelists spoke about how during COVID, lots of telcos put in place special bundles that made it possible for people to learn, from remote locations and stuff like that. That's very important and that's critical. But then we don't need that only during COVID. Like we also need that. We need that all the time. Most learning right now from 3 years old, most kids are already, tethered to devices, all the way to the fact that, the world we're in today is also changing a lot. So what that means is that whatever it is you learned in school, most likely you would have to update it for you to remain relevant. So in that sense, from early childhood all the way to, old age, we are constantly learning. So we need to be able to put the kinds of infrastructure, if it's digital devices, if it's connectivity, we need to be able to put that in place. And as it relates to connectivity, I think it's also helpful to be able to just, see some of the good efforts that are going on. So currently I know UNICEF, in partnership with, I think, some of the telcos, are mapping out all the schools in Ghana, essentially to get a sense of where they are on the internet spectrum. And I think that's a good starting point. From there on, we can now start seeing, okay, the next step will be how can we get them connectivity? But generally, I think we need to be able to map out what the infrastructure gap is. And based off of that, we can now start seeing how we can make the necessary partnerships or investments to be able to take us to the next step.
Wonderful. Let me get back to Nicholas and Evelyn. Now, from your different perspectives, how do we leverage the input of the entire ecosystem, teachers, students, other stakeholders, to design better learning products? Evelyn, let me start off with you.
Okay, thank you. To design better learning products, the focus must be on the user, and in our case, it's the students and teachers. So let's take WhatsApp, for instance. There was a time where people had problems typing. So then there was limited use of the app. So then they brought the feature of
the voice
notes. So that made people communicate without having to type. So for us, they should see our challenges, and they should do a need assessment and see our challenges, then prescribe things to solve that. So for instance, we have problems where due to network issues, you miss some parts of the class. And maybe you might ask your friend wasn't even focused in the first place. So if they should invest in pre-recorded videos where students can learn at their own pace. So when you miss, you could go back, watch the video, pause. If you don't understand, go back, start all over and all that. So that could be way.
Okay, all right. Nicholas, from a teacher's perspective?
Yeah. All these players we're talking about have certain expertise or technical knowledge that we can leverage on. But before we can do that, we need to identify certain issues and deal with them heads on. One is we need to identify a critical mass of players in this sector. We cannot pretend that everybody knows it all in this sector. Who are the players in the sector? We need to identify them. And then having identified that the critical mass of such people or players in a sector, we need to create a safe space for them to hold discussions on the sector itself or the space. What are the challenges? What are the products? What are the financial gaps in the sector? What deficit exists? What has been done already? And what must be done going forward? What targets do we have to set for ourselves? What are the policy issues? Kabiru talks about strategies. What strategies must be put in place? I'm sure those discussions or fora will help to unravel some of these issues. Then going forward, we also will need to design policy for the space. And that ties in with the strategy Kabiru talks about. So we need to have a policy in place. And then this policy should be shaped by all these players so that nobody operates in isolation with regard to how things must be done in the sector. Then we need to also encourage best practice sharing among them. So that a lot is going on individually at some universities and then some of the areas, but then not so much is platform is not created for them to share their experiences. So we need to begin to share best practices, but we can only do so when we bring such people on board. Then there should also be some benchmarking also done. At the moment, we know there are certain institutions that have taken the lead in this area or this space. How can they help the others who are down there? We need to benchmark them as well. And then there should be, in a way, commitment on the part of all players. Oftentimes when we talk about this, the focus is on government, but it's not only governments. Private sector is important. We need to be talking about non-profit organizations and CSOs, all of which have interest in this space. We need to see how we can tap into their experiences and expertise. So we cannot leverage on this space if we do not have a way of coordinating the efforts of these players, if we do not have strategies in place, if you have not policies in place, and if you are not willing to share best practice. And I'm sure by doing that, and also ensuring quality assurance in the space, we can't assume that everything being designed is fit for purpose and is good for consumption. There should be, but you can only ensure quality or do quality assurance when you have a policy in place, when you have strategies in place. And so policy is very important to regulate quality in the sector. And that is very important as well.
Great. Dr. Agangiba, let me bring you in. And, just to dovetail on that and hop on something you mentioned earlier about the concerns some parents have. Even some teachers have that, that they feel that some of the content's too internet heavy and all of that. And those things are like barriers to teaching and learning. What are some of the considerations people should have, or some of these stakeholders should have when implementing blended learning?
Thank you. So it's very true. But I mean, to be honest, the issue of internet, you can't take it out. It's a bedrock when it comes to blended learning. And so I'll still go back to what Kabiru said and what I also mentioned earlier. The subsidy on all this data, they should rethink, they have to still help us because it's very critical. But I think we just have to be innovative on a whole. If I take it from the teacher's perspective, yes, blended learning, but then we have to look at the way that the information we send out there, the teaching materials and so on, we can reduce the size of the files, in a way. If you are talking about video, it's not something you need to be doing a demonstration, calculation. You could also opt for an audio version, because for instance, you can look like 2-hour, 3-hour lecture on a platform like Zoom. If you look at the audio version, that's just a small file. It's not heavy. So then you could go for that option. If it's not something you're doing a lot of demonstrations, you can share that with them instead so that they could listen to it. We just look at the context where we find ourselves, and we have to look for options that can work for us. I just to look at example, like yesterday, my kids, where they attend school, so they said they're going to have some oral tests. It's a project, and they have an oral session of the project in French. So I think this teacher could have said, okay, have this idea, I'll connect and I'll talk to you on Zoom or something, right? But that can be so much of internet dependent. So it took the numbers for the parent. He said, okay, I'm going to call this time. I want to talk to a child on your phone. We're talking French for this number of time, and I just want to see. So he called my line, and I gave to my son. They had a discussion like 5 minutes in French to just test the oral. And I feel that it's okay, because if somebody even in a rural area with a yam, you can still call and the child will also be assessed, and it's fair, right? It just creates a very balanced system. So if the teacher just wanted to insist, no, you have to go on Google Meet, or some kids will be missing out. So we have to be innovative. We look at the context where we find ourselves. As teachers, we always have to devise ways and means. And that is why I think that this capacity building for teachers is very important, because they play a very critical role here. If we understand the different options, even if you do a video lecture, there's a way you can compress it. It becomes quite small. But a lot of them, they don't have an idea how to go about it. I think we always make a mistake when we equate literacy to digital literacy. It's absolutely different things. And so, okay, he's a master degree holder, he's got a PhD, so he should know how to do this. That's wrong. You know, literacy and ICT literacy are different things. You'll be shocked some people at their level of PhD asking you how to do this on WhatsApp, and class 2 people know how to do that already. So definitely, it's neither here nor there. The training is very important, I think, to inform them, give them more ideas how they can share and send out those materials to students in different ways that will not require so much internet, and will still be a blended approach anyway, because when they are out of the classroom, there is a way they can get some materials or explanation from the teachers, and then they'll be able to make use of. So from the teacher's perspective, that's what I would say. Yeah.
So listening to EdTech Monday on the City Breakfast Show. Today we are discussing accelerating blended learning, and my guests, Kabiru Seidu, Nicholas Brose, Engineer Dr. Mrs. Millicent Agangiba, and Evelyn Quaynor. Let's take our Vox Pop. It's part of what we do on EdTech Monday. And today we are speaking with Cecil Nutako. Cecil Nutako is CEO of eCampus, and he's also sharing his perspective on the topic of accelerating blended learning.
My name is Cecil Nutako. I'm the founder at eCampus. The challenges in implementing blended learning in Africa are enormous, but then I'll focus on just 3 of them. I think the very first one is about infrastructure and equipment. So to do blended learning, we're trying to create an intersection with digital tools and then traditional tools for learning. That required some level of change in the infrastructure and tools in our learning spaces. Those tools and infrastructure are not available. Our classrooms are not designed traditionally to accommodate digital tools. So the whiteboard uses a marker. To achieve blended learning, you need a different kind of whiteboard that has some level of digital capabilities to allow for blended learning to happen in that environment. So imagine a whiteboard that doesn't require that the teacher draws an image, but instead loads an image or loads a short video to explain a concept to the students. Our whiteboards today in our standardized classrooms are not like that. So that's what I mean by infrastructure and equipment being one of the challenges to achieve or implement blended learning on the continent. The second is equipping our teachers. Our teachers need to be retrained on digital skills, right? Our teacher training colleges or colleges of education do not have a lot of digital skills training in their curriculum. So we can have one of the finest teachers who are still not conversant with using digital tools to aid in their own lesson development and then the delivery of that lesson, and also on the assessment of their students using these digital tools. So that creates a bit of a challenge. Infrastructure and equipment and the skills, the digital skills of teachers that are in our classrooms pose a challenge to implementing blended learning. And finally, connectivity and electricity. I like to combine the two, right? So in most of our classrooms, majority of classrooms, we don't have electricity, right? And they don't have connectivity, internet connectivity. So that makes it very difficult to implement. So the 3 things, infrastructure and equipment, training teachers in digital skills so that they can be able to apply it in the classrooms, and then connectivity and electricity. If Africa can get these things right, we will reduce the barrier to adopting or implementing blended learning on the continent. With regards to infrastructure, right, what eCampus has been doing is to help teachers use their existing tools like their own smartphones, their personal computers, to be able to prepare their lesson materials, to be able to create a blended environment. We've encouraged teachers to invest in things like projectors, so that even if the school or the classroom or the institution doesn't have those infrastructures, the teacher themselves can connect their own projectors to their own personal laptops and be able to provide alternative content formats like video, audio, images, to better explain concepts that they would have otherwise have to sketch it on a board or use some conceptual stories to explain to students. Some teachers embrace this because it makes their work easier and it gives them fulfillment. Other teachers may not be able to afford it. So in as much as we are trying to encourage them, we also urge the institutions that are responsible for transforming our educational sector to consider introducing those tools to the teachers themselves, if not necessarily redesign the entire classroom, which would have been ideal. But of course, there are a number of things that governments on the continent need to worry about. But equipping the teachers themselves with those tools will help them be able to create blended learning materials. And on the second hand, that same tool can now help the teacher improve their own digital skills. And then will then buttress the second challenge of teachers not having their own skills. Although the ideal would be to work with the colleges of education to provide that. What we have done, because we don't have the authority to engage the colleges of education on that level, what we've done is we've created what we call the eCampus Fellowship Program, where we encourage teachers to become eCampus Fellows. So when you apply to become a fellow, we take you through digital skills training, equip you with tools that can help you produce blended learning content. And then those content can then be distributed to students via the eCampus platform or via the laptop or phone of that particular teacher in any school that they are teaching it. So this is what eCampus have been doing to address the infrastructure and then the digital skills gap for teachers. The internet and electricity issue, eCampus has partnerships with telecom companies, notably Telecel, right, across 9 countries, where anytime you are accessing our platform on that network, you do not have to pay for internet connectivity. We are trying to expand that partnership with other networks like MTN, Orange, Glo, so that we can provide connectivity at no cost to teachers, parents, students who would use our platform to help them learn smarter, become employable, and attain prosperity. With regard to electricity, we do not have the capacity to extend that level of support. But we do acknowledge that once our revenues grow to a certain degree, we could put up to 5% of our revenue into providing solar panels or solar energy to selected institutions, whereby we can then complete the triangle of providing connectivity and electricity support, digital skills training for teachers, and then infrastructure and equipment to enable the implementation of blended learning across the continent. Thank you.
This morning, as we are discussing blended learning or accelerating edition of EdTech Monday. My guests are still here with me. Let me ask them my final question. Let me take Kabiru and Nicholas's thoughts on how we can harness the potential of the blended learning approach to the future of work.
Thanks, Nathan. As it relates to work, I mean, I think we're living in a world where essentially work is continuously evolving at a very much faster pace than it has in the past.
Yeah.
And I think for us, that brings lots of challenges in the sense of I mean, things which in the past, which we've done and we're pretty much okay, we need to start thinking about how might we be able to retrain a new generation of people who can essentially do it better. I mean, the mantra of today's world, I think, is sustainability. So even take something like agriculture. We know agriculture as it is right now, I mean, takes lots of toll on the environment and our water bodies, is one of the biggest polluters. But then at the same time too as well, in most African countries, agriculture is one of the largest employers, or it has been for a while. I mean, right now, what we are seeing is that, I mean, across the continent, the numbers of farmers are actually declining. And lots of it is largely because the newer generation are very hesitant to embark in agriculture exactly the same way their parents did that. So when you think about a challenge like this, essentially we need to be thinking about approaches that are one, I mean, we can deploy using without technology, I mean, without actually having physical presence at a particular place, things that we can scale really quickly. And blended learning, I think it's something that essentially can help in this space.
Okay.
So for us in particular, I mean, one of the things which we've been trying to do is really using, I mean, the kinds of technology that we build, virtual reality simulations, to be able to train essentially the next generation of farmers and encourage young people to get involved in farming, but primarily using technology as an anchor to actually draw them in.
Okay, all right. Nicholas?
Yeah, it's been predicted by some experts that pretty soon blended learning will take center stage, such that even the adjective blended will be removed. And we're talking about learning.
Okay.
Yeah, that is how serious the situation is getting. And so the world of work must not gloss over this. But what needs to be done? One, we need to be asking private sector, and for that matter, partnerships, to invest in the space. There's infrastructure gaps in the space. They need to help invest in that space by way of infrastructure. Then we also need to have them change their culture, organizational culture with regard to blended learning. Some still believe that blended learning is of low quality as compared to face-to-face learning. But they should remember that it saves costs. It provides flexibility to their employees as well. And then going forward, we also need to be talking about all of them helping to shape policy in that regard. And then it goes back to my last point about quality assurance, and then collaboration between industry and academia.
Okay.
With regard to the designing of products and modules, etc., that can best fit employers.
Okay.
I think these are some of the ways we can harness the potential of it for world of work.
Thank you. You have just a few seconds.
So for students, our experience was just online and the traditional face-to-face. So I think the blended learning should be explored more and utilize all aspects, not just limited to online and in person. So that is all I want to say.
That was great. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I had Kabiru Seidu, who's Chief Executive Officer of Nubian VR. I also had Nicholas BORSE, educator at Bishop Herman Senior High School and the 2018 Best National Teacher. I also had Engineer Dr. Mrs. Millicent Agangiba, Executive Director, Inclusive Tech Group, and a lecturer at UPSA, and Evelyn Quaynor, Level 300 Law Student at GIMPA. We've been having a conversation on accelerating blended learning in Africa. That was our theme for our June edition of EdTech Monday, which is live on City FM every last Monday of the month. And is a brainchild of the partnership between the MasterCard Foundation and MEST Africa. EdTech Monday is a platform for EdTech entrepreneurs, education stakeholders, and government reps to facilitate critical conversations on the use of tech for teaching and learning. My name is Nathan Quao. I moderated the session. God willing, we'll catch you next month with another exciting conversation on EdTech Monday. All right, let's get into the news at